Welcome to Beza Performance. This is the Beza Performance live stream. I'm Marshall Henley, the president of Beza Performance, where we develop executive disciplines for world-class orgs. So today we're going to focus on lean and more specifically what we call the missing half of lean, respect for people. So for that important area, Beza uses the tools and tech developed by Macresco. And so today I want to welcome my friend and colleague from Macresco, the president, Scott Gauvin. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Marshall. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely a pleasure. So before we kind of move forward, we teased this by saying that your lack of disrespect is not the same as respect, at least not in terms of how we're thinking about it. So why don't you elaborate on that as we move forward?
Yeah, well, some people say, being nice or the lack of disrespect. So we don't have disrespect in our organization, but that's not the same. That doesn't equate to practicing respect for people. It's not unusual for an organization that does lean that they actually practice the elements of continuous improvement side of lean, but there are really two sides of that important equation, and they support each other. The respect for people and the continuous improvement side, they support each other. And so I often see the lack of practice on respect for people side of lean. And this is why we built kind of our business around looking at the respect for people piece.
Okay. Sorry, jumped the gun on going to your slide here. So let me turn this off. The other thing I think would be helpful for folks before we get into the meat of the practice of respect for people would be to talk about how you got to this point. What was your journey to kind of get to this point of thinking through these things?
Yeah, when I first got involved with lean, it was in conjunction with Six Sigma. We were doing some amazing engineering and process redesign work. We were saving a lot of costs, we were eliminating a lot of waste, improving quality, reducing delivery times, and really just driving business metrics beyond what those leaders' expectations were. But there was kind of a dark side of that process. It allowed the organization to reduce headcount in many instances. And many of the changes that were imposed on people, though in many cases it did make the job easier for those implementation methods in kind of retrospect were coercive. So as a result, several of the improvements we made didn't sustain, and in a few cases actually got worse because the organization changes that were made in the name of cost savings or productivity gains made things worse for the organization long term. It was really quite a learning experience for me because I knew we were doing good work. I knew we were crafting really innovative new methods and processes, but I was a little troubled by the way we were engaging with the people. So it was around this time that I began to think a lot more about the people side and had this idea that we could do the same work, but with a more human-centered approach. And that led me to really study kind of the Toyota model in a lot more depth.
Right.
A lot of people associate lean or what they call lean manufacturing, these methods that are derived from the Toyota operating model with continuous improvement, the process side of lean. But it's actually made up of two parts. I can show you. Yeah. So, there's the CI and there's the continuous improvement and the respect for people. In about 2001, Toyota revealed this to us in a document they called the Toyota Way. And then Jeffrey Liker in, I think, 2004 wrote a book about it with the same title. And, CI, which is defined by Toyota as challenge, kaizen, and genshi genbutsu. But the CI side doesn't really address the people elements or the people side of change.
Mm-hmm.
The respect for people side is not as prevalent in the operation circles, but it's the other half of the equation that really relates to the cultural underpinnings of the Toyota organization. And this side is often just described as respect and teamwork. And it's been hard for Western organizations to understand this concept. The definition of respect and teamwork is kind of thin. And honestly, we've become desensitized to the significance of the words respect and teamwork. And it's also what I discovered. It's also hard for people from individualistic cultures to grasp because these concepts stem from the collectivistic traditions of the Japanese culture.
Yeah.
But, for Toyota, the respect for people side is the more important of the two sides. In fact, the former CEO and chairman of Toyota, Fujio Cho, once said, "We build people, then we build cars," which really kind of emphasizes the difference in the mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Most of the Beza guys that we've used through the years are all former Toyota folks, so they would agree with everything you've said. What I like about what you've done is you've approached it from a non-Toyota standpoint, as somebody that wasn't embedded into Kentucky or something like that. And in fact, you work with Tony quite a bit, who is one of the Beza guys who was spent 20 years at Kentucky, and those conversations were always fascinating to me because Tony is he has the what do we call it, the curse of knowledge, right? He knows what he knows and he knows when to use it, but to systematize it's hard, when you're not when you've been so extremely just immersed in it for so long. So I like the way you've systematized it, and maybe we can dig into that a little bit as we move forward.
Yeah, so I didn't have the benefit of growing up in Toyota, so
Yeah.
I didn't get that osmosis learning that someone like Tony has. But organizational change requires not only structural and process change, but cultural and behavior change as well.
Yeah.
And that's where this holistic approach to lean kind of began for me. So I had to research it and understand it and read about it and investigate it, so that I could learn more about how to pursue it in a more holistic way, kind of like innately how the people at Toyota do it.
Right.
So, managers are often motivated by company needs and metrics, typically financially driven. So CI efforts tend to be managed according to the leader's needs and metrics. And as a
Yeah.
result, we often go after the 8 wastes that we can see. But I describe the 8 wastes as kind of the surface pains. If we only ever address the surface pains, we'll never get at the root cause of the problem. In fact,
Right.
I think I can demonstrate here. I've got a model that I know that you like. Let me move
Yeah.
this. So, our methods for getting at the root of the problem begin with the organizational dynamic, what we call SABA. We could do a whole session on SABA. At a high level, it stands for structures, activities, behaviors, and attitudes. And the structures drive activities, activities drive behaviors, behaviors drive attitudes, and that's what we see as the result of the behaviors and attitudes. We see those behaviors and attitudes, and we want to fix them. We want to address the behaviors and attitudes. But we sometimes want to do that without understanding the source of them. And this tends to result in what we look at as the coercive change. For now, if you just understand SABA to be the organizational dynamic, which is one of the sources of the wastes. There are also, so if you think of SABA as the organizational dynamic, but then there's also environmental or situational circumstances like, I don't know, maybe a pandemic or supply chain problems that can
Yeah.
create disruption and lead to other unmet needs. And then the third one is our own personal unmet needs. And so, we're often personal motivations and need for more autonomy or mastery or connection, and connection to purpose can create deficits and these, what we call the unmet needs, that really affect productivity. What ends up happening is the unmet needs create stress and unproductive behaviors. And this manifests as what we look at as the operational pain that often looks like one or several of the 8 wastes that that we were just talking about that we tend to go after. Now,
Maybe one of the root causes of the 8 wastes,
even one of the root causes of the 8 wastes, right? And so, conventional Kaizen events aim to address the wastes. But if you note the line that I've got here between what they're able to address on the left and what we don't consider on the right, and the difference in each side is the process side versus the people side of lean. And so what we often talk about in this bringing together of respect for people and continuous improvement is really the practice of lean. If you're only working on the process side, you're not really fully practicing lean. You're practicing continuous improvement, but to fully practice lean, you really need to move that line all the way to the root to fully embrace the promise that lean can offer. We need to incorporate continuous improvement side of lean, the process optimization with respect for people side of lean, what we call the potential optimization. And the purpose of the respect for people rubric, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit, is really to help practitioners and organizations move that line more to the right side of the, so that the CI and respect for people are being practiced together and more holistically.
One of our consultants, I won't use his real name, was asked, Daniel-san, why do Americans not follow standard work? And that's a very good question, right? There was a lot of discussion around that. Um, so let's move into a little bit more of the rubric at this point.
Okay. So the purpose for building this rubric is really to provide organizations a roadmap, not too dissimilar to what we have with the continuous improvement side of the equation with all of the tools. The tool set or path doesn't really exist on the respect for people side. And if you think it's just about being nice, or if you think that respect for people is just about not being disrespectful, well, you've really kind of missed the whole point. Which is why practicing respect for people is vital to achieving that promise that Lean can offer us. Since its baseline definition of respect for people is teamwork and respect, that doesn't really easily lend itself to a specific practice. And so we created this rubric by which companies and individuals could gauge their prospective behaviors and commitment. So in our view, respect for people is both how to pursue Lean as well as the reasons to pursue it. It speaks directly to the cultural underpinnings of the organizational circumstances that affect Lean's adoption, the way it's practiced, and the sustainability of the changes that are made. And it's a blueprint for cultivating the kind of learning, innovative thinking, and the kind of future-focused culture that galvanizes both connection and performance. So to get into it, to have respect for people, you must first have compassion for the stakeholders involved and for their needs and challenges and their circumstances. And we talk about stakeholders, we're using that term very intentionally. Often we are focused in the continuous improvement side on the customer. And here we're expanding that a little bit from customer to stakeholders, including the employees, the suppliers, the owners of the business, the community that it serves. And so we're really kind of expanding the group of people that we're talking about here. And what this means is having empathy for the circumstances that negatively impact stakeholders' working experience, but also a desire to help them improve. And so you can't have compassion by just being empathetic. You also have to have this desire to improve. But you can't have compassion for people if you're judging them. So to practice compassion, there's three things that we think you have to do. The first one is become aware of the biases and judgments that affect how we engage each other, how we develop policies, practice governance, and label problematic issues or people.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if I can divert here for a second, I want to tell you a little story about Joe, because it'll help illustrate, I think, this specific element.
There will be lots of stories about Joe over in the coming months. There's lots of Joes. So
there's lots of Joes. Yeah. So Joe is not the actual name of the person.
Certainly not.
But the situation is a real situation. So I was invited to a company, sat down with the manager, and the manager said, "Hey, we've got a great company. We've got some really good people, but we've got a few people with some bad attitudes." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, tell me about the bad attitudes." Well, there's this guy named Joe. Joe has been here for a long time. We've been trying to do this Lean thing and get him involved in Kaizens. He wants nothing to do with these Kaizen activities that we're doing. I said, "Okay, well, can I go talk to Joe?" Sure. So he brings me down, introduces me to Joe, and then he leaves. And after a few minutes of some pleasantries, I said, "So, Joe, can I ask you a question?" "Sure. What do you think about this company?" And Joe stops and looks at me and says, "You want the truth?" I said, "Sure, yeah. What do you really think about this company?" He says, "Worst company ever." Okay, great. I said, "Out of curiosity, how long have you been here, Joe?" "About 25 years. I said, "And how long has it been the worst company ever?" He stops for a second and goes, 25 years. And I said, "Okay, that's really interesting." I said, "Joe, why don't you share with me a little bit of what you do?" So he starts walking me through this assembly that he has to put together. And at one point, as he's walking through this, he gets a little frustrated. He says, "Oh, look at this damn thing." I say, "Hey, what's going on there?" He says, "Look at this. I don't know what's wrong with these engineers. I can't get my fingers in here. I can't get this tightened the way I need to get it tightened. And I got to get so many of these done every day. And if I don't, then I got my supervisor at my backside." And I said, so if you can't get it tightened, what do you do? He goes, well, I have to pass it on. Then somewhere down the line in QA, they catch it and they tighten it, I guess. I said, oh, okay. I said, that seems to bother you. He goes, damn right it bothers me. So well, why does that bother you so much, Joe? He goes, son, I was brought up, if you're going to do something, then you do it right or you don't do it at all. I said, oh, I understand. So I go back to the manager and I say, hey, I think I know what's up with Joe. He goes, you do? That's great. How are we going to fix him? I said, well, I think the problem is more you. He says, problem is me? What do you mean? I said,
Wrong answer.
yeah, I know. I said, I think the problem here is that you've been judging him. And as a result, you've been treating him as if your judgments are actually true. That, you think he's got a bad attitude or you think that he's lazy in some way. But in fact, what is happening here is that he's frustrated because he's not allowed to do a good job. And the manager said, okay, well, help me understand more. I said, there's a lack of clarity between what his expectations of himself are and your expectations of his work and his performance and how he contributes. And there's no platform for him to challenge what he thinks the problem might be. Mm-hmm. And, so this is a great example of where we see SABA issues, situational issues or personal unmet issues that result in stress and unproductive behaviors that I was originally called out to address with this company. So the manager is frustrated, creates more policies and procedures to control Joe. And then Joe is disenfranchised and he disengages and no one really wins at the end of the day. So part of this rubric that we've created, the first piece of have compassion for stakeholders, is to become aware of our own biases and judgments and how those are playing out. The second element of the rubric is to cultivate what we call a learning mindset. And so cultivating a mindset that focuses on learning instead of jumping to conclusions. And this often involves learning how to ask open-ended questions and coaching questions. Really being careful not to inject the solutions into the question. Then you need to learn to listen. And I could go on for days about the lack of listening skills that most managers have. That skill turns out to be harder than most people think to learn. But it's a critical one because if we're listening with that judgment filter, we're not really going to hear all of the issues. And then the third element then is engaging in the practice of compassion. Now what we want to do is turn those skills into a daily habit to question our own assumptions about people and their needs and make sure that they're based on fact, not on just what we see on the surface or based on the judgments that we've created in our own mind.
So one of the things I love about this, I can already hear some of my clients, presidents of companies, even saying, well, this is a bit foo-foo. This is the stuff the HR group, leads us in. But, as we dive into the rubric and some of the tool sets that you've developed, these are actually practical things that are going to give the whole culture a boost when it comes to the CI side of the equation. So wait for the third segment here, because I think that's important for people to understand. And I do believe that these are the right things to do in this segment, and you got to start with them. I wholeheartedly agree with that. But if you want to see some KPIs moved, you will. Just wait till the third segment, and then we'll talk about that shortly.
Yeah, well, in fact, if you've ever tried to practice the 5 whys, then the 5 whys is almost an attempt to practice this have compassion for stakeholders, because it's forcing you to continue to ask questions and dive deeper into what's really going on. And so 5 whys isn't just like, okay, it's 5 things that you have to get 5 levels. It could be 12 levels. It could be 15 levels. The point of it is you keep getting deeper and deeper to really dig at the root cause, really find out what is the unmet need, what is the circumstance, or what is the organizational dynamic that's affecting whatever this issue is that we're trying to uncover.
Yeah, maybe another way to think of it is the clean line we drew between the two halves, and this is the missing half, isn't that clean. They both inform each other. Even the description of Joe's overburden, right? The ergonomics of it, that being cared about as a major component of what you're trying to eliminate on the CI side of things, the continuous improvement side is an aspect of respect for people. But I do think that the challenge that my clients have is just implementing this stuff. It's it's back to what we said earlier. Are we just talking about being nice, or is there something more? And I think there's a lot more.
There is a lot
So
more.
let's jump into the second
Okay.
chunk there then.
So once we have compassion for people, it's easier to appreciate their innate value, who they are, not just what they can do for us. So that's the second principle, speaks to the way that we take care of the things that we claim are so valuable. It's about how we should cultivate people's value for their long-term potential versus the short-term benefits that we get from their hands. And so we do that. There's three components to this one. And the first one is about providing clarity and transparency around organizational goals and the specificity around individual performance expectations. Joe, unfortunately, was completely misaligned to the organizational purpose, vision, and strategy. There was really no clarification or discussion around expectations. And there's a lot of unspoken stuff, and so because of that, we're not really practicing respect for people in that case. And so the first piece here is to create clarity and transparency, not only at the organizational level, but at the management level and at the team level and at the individual level.
So Hoshin Conray is a good example of where that's,
Hoshin Conray is one of the attempts at helping create that clarity and transparency.
We're not talking about Hoshin Conray here per se, but that's a great example of where the value is reflected.
So the second element is focusing on employee well-being and development. And this is a big category, of course, but caring about the stressors that affect well-being and supporting people's need for growth is important. And at Toyota, they describe this as hito tsukuru, and I think that's translated roughly as the making of people. But the sentiment is about a lifelong journey, not about a specific skill to be attained. Being the well-being and development that people intend to create in their organization really is revolved around this creating a journey, not just a learning opportunity to achieve a task.
Right.
This often requires a lot of coaching and mentoring along that journey. And so Toyota does a really good job of thinking about the whole journey for an employee, not just what skill do I need them to get today so that they can do their job today. And so the third element is actively practicing gratitude and recognition and making it a point not to only recognize wins and achievements, but being thoughtful about appreciating people's efforts and recognize even the small wins and contributions. So these are the three components of the treat people like assets versus liabilities. And I know sometimes people say, well, we shouldn't call people assets. And I'm not calling them assets. I'm saying we should treat them like assets, just like we would treat any asset. We make sure we put good TPM around a piece of equipment. We make sure that it gets upgraded when it needs to get upgraded. We make sure that we're maintaining it on a regular basis because there's some value there. And we don't do that well enough for the people in the organization as well.
Yeah. All right. Third, I told everybody wait for the third segment. This is good.
Yeah. So when we treat people like assets or valuable assets, we're more inclined to take their opinion seriously. They in turn then feel more confident suggesting and advocating for change. And so this third element of the Respect for People rubric reminds us of the experimental nature of the lean journey, that it requires what we call positive disruption to flourish. And so in order for people within the organization to feel comfortable challenging assumptions about definitions of value, how it gets created or delivered, the organization has to prioritize three things. So the first is both vertical and horizontal connections among employees. So fostering or creating connections. And this is really about providing opportunities for learning and building trust outside of their department or their purview. At Toyota, they call this nemawashi, and I love that because it's about, it's literally translated as preparing the ground for planting. And the vertical connections help you more deeply understand the plight of others within your work stream, but the horizontal connections allow you to appreciate the diversity and contributions of those outside of your purview. I think Toyota does this really well. They know that the better people are connected, the better people know each other and understand each other and can work together, the better people can innovate, problem solve, and collaborate. And so this becomes an important aspect of the whole bringing people together to problem solve and to experiment. And that leads us to the second element. So provide the governance. This is about providing the governance and support to normalize the trial and error that really is at the heart of continuous improvement. Kaizen, unfortunately, has become this thing where it's a 5-day event. We get a bunch of people together. We lay out what the plan is, and then we have to have this positive result at the end of the week on Friday to report out to the managers. The problem with that whole notion is that, if I know that I have to have a positive result in 5 days, well, then what am I going to do I'm going to play it safe. What can I do in these next couple of days that I know will have a positive effect? Because we've almost set up Kaizen as a thing that we can't fail on. We have to report out, and so we have to show this positive result. And that kind of goes counter to what Kaizen is. Kaizen is more about a gradual experimentation, fail, learn from that failure, and then keep iterating. And so it's not about an activity. It's not about a specific event. It's about the process of iterating and learning and experimenting and failing and learning from those failures. But we've got to create the environment where failure is okay and where we can experiment. And some experiments are going to work and some experiments are not. That's going to help us push to the boundaries of what's possible. The third element is so the importance and value of challenging assumptions among all levels of the organizational hierarchy. And so this is what we call challenge convention, or challenge assumptions, or challenge the status quo. This is not meant to be a negative discord. It's meant to flesh out the better truth, the deeper problem, the better solution, the better answer. And the idea here is that anyone can challenge anyone in the organization in the name of improvement or in the name of trying to find a better solution. Sometimes I have clients that want to jump straight to positive disruption because they're like, yes, this is what we need. This is going to help us, win in the marketplace. And that's true. They're all excited about challenging the status quo because, they're like, yes, so that's what we need to be challenging the status quo. But that's until then they're challenged. They want everyone else to be challenged, but they don't necessarily want themselves to be challenged. But the elements build on each other. So, for example, to have an environment that challenges convention, you need to be willing to be wrong or own your own failures. And so you need an environment that normalizes failure, being wrong and experimenting towards better solutions. And to have an environment of experimentation, you need to create diverse environments where people connect and share ideas. And in order to have an environment that allows for connection, you need to build trust. And you can't build trust artificially. But a great way to build trust is through genuine gratitude and recognition. And if we really appreciate the gifts and value that people bring to the work, we should consider their well-being and provide a learning journey that allows the whole person to develop, not just the skills that are going to benefit us today. And if we really want people to use their gifts, then it's essential that they are in the know and we've created clarity and transparency so that they can contribute. And we're more willing to create clarity and transparency for those we deem worthy. Hence the need for the daily practice and learning about the plight of others by asking questions and listening without judgment, which brings us back to compassion.
Yeah, and that's why we like the word practice, not implementation or deployment. This is not a one-time, as you mentioned earlier, not a one-time thing. You can get better at this all the time as well. I like to think of it as, if you want to foster positive disruption, you're going to have to first have compassion for stakeholders and treat people like assets, and the order is important. But I think most people, that's what they want to do anyway. But it's hard. This is the only kind of tools and tech that we have when we talk about the respect for people. The rubric itself feeds into the stuff we use, and I really look forward to kind of sharing more of that as we do additional live streams in the future here. So I think we're going to need to wrap it up there, Scott, for today. Any other final thoughts before we do so?
No, just that, this isn't the end all. This rubric isn't the end all be all for what the practice of respect for people is. It's really what we've tried to create is just the foundation. And so if you can get these basic elements in place in your organization and you're practicing these very intentionally, now you're building the foundation to grow beyond just like continuous improvement.
Great. Well, we'll have Scott on next month. I don't have the date in my head, but we'll certainly announce it on all the platforms. And don't miss us next week for SNOP Thursday, the 14th of April at 3 p.m. Eastern. And we'll continue the week after that. I think we've got a couple of live streams, so just keep us posted. Like and subscribe, and then you won't have to wait for me to tell you that we're doing something. It'll automatically show up in your feed. And thanks again for joining us with our Beza Performance live stream for Thursday, the 7th of April. Thanks.